On July 25, 1965, Bob Dylan walked onto the Newport Folk Festival stage with an electric guitar. What happened next has been debated for 60 years. The crowd booed, or they cheered, or both simultaneously. Nobody present can agree. Pete Seeger, the folk music patriarch, was so upset he allegedly tried to find an axe to cut the power cables. Dylan played 3 songs and walked off the stage. Folk music and rock music were never the same after that night. The remarkable thing about this story is not what happened, it is what it meant, and why it still matters 60 years later, when the question of whether an artist should give their audience what it wants or what it needs has never been more relevant. This is the story of the 15 minutes that changed American music. By the summer of 1965, Bob Dylan was not merely famous. He was a symbol. The folk revival had made him the voice of a generation. The protest songs, "Blowin' in the Wind," "The Times They Are A-Changin'," "Masters of War," "A Hard Rain's A-Gonna Fall," had given an entire counterculture its language. He was 24 years old. He had been famous for 2 years. He was exhausted, not just physically, existentially. Dylan chafed at the label spokesman of a generation more than almost any other description applied to him. He had never asked to be anyone's spokesman. He had asked to be a songwriter. The two things were not the same. His 4th album, Another Side of Bob Dylan, released in 1964, had started the drift. Personal songs, love songs, less explicitly political material. Folk purists noticed. Some complained. But in March 1965, with the release of Bringing It All Back Home, one side electric, one side acoustic, Dylan made his intentions undeniable. He was going somewhere. He was going there whether his audience followed or not. And in July 1965, 5 days before Newport, Columbia released Like a Rolling Stone. 6 minutes long, completely electric, so far from folk music that they were now arguing about whether it was even the same category of thing. It went to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, the biggest hit of Bob Dylan's career. More people heard it in its first week than had heard all his folk albums combined. By 1965, Bob Dylan had given a generation its language. He then decided to go somewhere else entirely. Do you think artists owe their audience anything, or only their own next creative move? The Newport Folk Festival in 1965 was the most important folk music gathering in America. It had started in 1959 under folk luminary Pete Seeger and festival founder George Wine. By 1965, it was an institution, the place where folk music was celebrated, protected, and passed on. Dylan had appeared at Newport in 1963 and 1964. Both times he had been celebrated as the finest songwriter the folk revival had produced. Both times he had played acoustic. Both times the audience had received him as one of their own. In the week of the 1965 festival, Dylan hastily recruited musicians from the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, along with session pianist Al Cooper, who had played the signature organ on Like a Rolling Stone, to back him on stage. This was not a carefully planned statement. It was an improvised decision made the night before. Dylan hadn't decided in advance to cause the controversy that followed. He had decided in advance that he was going to play electric. The controversy was someone else's interpretation of his decision. Dylan improvised the Newport Electric set one night before. He hadn't planned to start a revolution. He'd planned to play electric. Does it matter whether the artist intended to change things, or only that things changed? On July 25, 1965, Bob Dylan walked onto the Newport stage. He was wearing a polka dot shirt and dark sunglasses. He looked nothing like the earnest troubadour in the flat cap who had played here 2 years before. He was holding a Fender Stratocaster, a solid-body electric guitar, the same kind Chuck Berry played, the same kind of instrument that folk music had specifically defined itself against. Dylan counted in the band. They launched into Maggie's Farm. The reaction was immediate. Both boos and cheers erupted almost simultaneously from the first bar. The sound mix was catastrophic. The volume was so loud and so poorly balanced that Dylan's lyrics were almost completely unintelligible. The band drowned him out. Joe Boyd, who worked on the sound that night, described the reaction. A buzz of shock and amazement ran through the crowd. When the song finished, there was a roar that contained many sounds. Certainly boos were included, but they weren't in a majority. Dylan didn't stop. He played Like a Rolling Stone. He played Phantom Engineer. Then he walked off the stage. The entire electric set had lasted approximately 15 minutes. MC Peter Yarrow begged Dylan to come back. Dylan returned to the stage with an acoustic guitar. He played Mr. Tambourine Man and It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. Nobody present could agree on what had happened. Decades of argument have not resolved it. What is certain, Pete Seeger in the wings was reportedly so distressed by the electric sound that he was actively trying to cut the power. Witnesses say he couldn't find the cables. Pete Seeger, the man who helped invent the Newport Folk Festival, tried to cut the power during Dylan's electric set. Was he protecting something real or afraid of something new? The controversy at Newport in 1965 was not really about an electric guitar. It was about ownership. The folk community had claimed Bob Dylan as its own. They had made him into something. The spokesman, the voice, the standard bearer. They had decided what he was for and what he meant. And he had rejected that. Not rudely, not with a speech. By plugging in a guitar. Al Cooper, the organist who played on Like a Rolling Stone and was on stage at Newport, had a different theory about the booing. He said years later, the reason they booed is that he only played for 15 minutes when everybody else played for 45 minutes or an hour. They were feeling ripped off, wouldn't you? They didn't give a shit about us being electric. The truth is probably both things. The sound was terrible. The set was short. And the electric guitar was a statement that the audience was not ready for, even if many of them would later claim they had been. Dylan didn't tour again for 8 years after the accident that summer. He didn't play Newport again for 37 years. When he returned to Newport in 2002, he played electric again. Nobody booed. Subscribe. Volume 3 of the Bob Dylan Files drops next, and it gets louder.